There is a silent power in being different, but it is not the kind of power most people understand. From childhood, you are trained to blend in, to adjust your tone, your opinions, your behaviors so that others feel comfortable around you. You learn quickly that acceptance feels safe and rejection feels dangerous. So you adapt, you smooth your edges, you hide the parts of you that don't fit neatly into the crowd. But here is the truth no one teaches you. When you are different, you possess an advantage that others cannot predict, control, or easily replace. And that advantage can be dangerous, not because it harms others, but because it disrupts expectations. It makes people uneasy. It shifts power in subtle ways. In relationships, especially with emotionally avoidant personalities, being different becomes even more potent. Avoidants are drawn to autonomy, mystery, and emotional independence. The one who stands apart, who does not chase, does not over-explain, does not beg for validation, becomes the one who cannot be easily categorized. This is not about rebellion for attention. This is about strategic separation, the kind that builds intrigue, the kind that shifts the balance, the kind that gives you leverage without speaking a word. Now let us understand the 5 core truths behind the dangerous advantage of being different. The moment you begin to shape yourself around other people's expectations, you surrender the very edge that makes you powerful. Most individuals, without even realizing it, are trained to seek approval as a survival instinct. They scan the room, read emotional cues, and subtly adjust their tone, opinions, and reactions to maintain harmony. This habit feels intelligent. It feels socially aware. But beneath the surface, it is a quiet form of self-erasure. The more you adapt to be liked, the more predictable you become. And predictability is comfort. But comfort rarely inspires fascination or respect. Human psychology is wired to pay attention to disruption. When someone behaves exactly as expected, the brain relaxes. There is nothing to decode, nothing to solve. But when a person responds in a way that cannot be immediately categorized, something shifts. Curiosity activates, attention sharpens. The mind leans forward. This is where difference becomes powerful. Not loud difference, not theatrical rebellion, but controlled unpredictability. When you do not rush to fill silence, for example, you introduce tension. Silence makes many uncomfortable because it forces self-awareness. Most people scramble to speak, to smooth over the pause, to reduce the pressure. But the one who remains calm in silence signals emotional stability. They are not desperate to manage the atmosphere. They are not anxious about approval. That composure alone shifts power. In relationships, especially with emotionally avoidant personalities, this principle becomes even more significant. Avoidant individuals are hypersensitive to emotional demands. They instinctively retreat when they sense pressure, intensity, or dependency. When someone over-explains their feelings, seeks constant reassurance, or pushes for immediate clarity, it triggers withdrawal. The avoidant nervous system equates emotional pursuit with loss of autonomy. But when you are different, when you do not chase, do not flood them with messages, do not demand instant resolution, you interrupt their expectation. They are used to people leaning in harder when they pull away. That pattern feels familiar, predictable, safe. When you lean back instead, not as a tactic but from genuine independence, you create psychological tension that cannot easily categorize you. And what cannot be categorized cannot be controlled. There is also strength in withholding total transparency. Modern culture promotes radical openness as proof of authenticity. But complete exposure removes mystery. When someone reveals everything immediately, their fears, their insecurities, their long-term expectations, accelerates intimacy artificially. It feels intense, but it eliminates discovery. Discovery is what sustains attraction over time. Being different means understanding that not everything must be explained. You can feel deeply without displaying everything instantly. You can care without overcommitting prematurely. You can express interest without surrendering your center. This balance creates depth. It forces the other person to move toward you rather than passively consuming what you offer. Predictability reduces perceived value because the mind conserves energy. If someone always replies instantly, always agrees, always adjusts, the brain registers them as stable background presence. There is no urgency, no intrigue. But when your responses are thoughtful rather than immediate, when your opinions are firm rather than molded, when your time is clearly valuable, your presence carries weight. This is not about manipulation, it is about self-containment. There is a difference between playing games and maintaining composure. Games are reactive, composure is intentional. When you are centered in your own life, your goals, your routines, your internal standards, you do not need to manufacture unpredictability. It emerges naturally because your world does not revolve around managing someone else's perception. Avoidant individuals in particular respect emotional restraint more than emotional intensity. They may not articulate it, but they feel safer around someone who does not collapse into them. The moment they sense that your emotional state depends entirely on their availability, they experience pressure. But when you demonstrate that you have your own rhythm, your own focus, your own stability, you become psychologically intriguing. Difference, in this sense, is the refusal to compete for attention. It is the quiet decision not to mirror someone's every mood. If they withdraw, you do not panic. If they delay, you do not interrogate. If they test distance, you maintain your center. This steadiness feels unusual in a world where most people react impulsively. And here lies the dangerous advantage. When you stop trying to be liked, you become difficult to ignore. Not because you demand attention, but because your self-possession creates gravity. People lean toward what feels grounded. They become curious about what is not easily accessible. The crowd seeks comfort in similarity, but fascination is born from contrast. When you are willing to stand apart to risk misunderstanding rather than dilute yourself, you activate a deeper psychological response. You are no longer background noise. You are a presence, and presence, when it is calm and self-contained, holds more power than approval ever could. Standing apart comes with a subtle form of danger because it exposes you to judgment in ways most people never experience. Society has a natural tendency to label and categorize what it cannot control, and those who refuse to conform emotionally or socially often become targets of criticism, misunderstanding, or even resentment. People are uncomfortable with unpredictability because it challenges their sense of order and security. When you do not behave as expected, when you do not conform to emotional scripts or social norms, you automatically create a form of tension that others may interpret as arrogance, coldness, or detachment. These labels are not inherently accurate. They are defensive mechanisms people use to manage the discomfort of facing someone who does not bend to their expectations. Understanding this dynamic is essential because it reveals that the danger of being different is less about external threats and more about the power that your independence exerts on those around you. The moment you maintain emotional self-sufficiency, you shift the balance in interactions, particularly with individuals who have avoidant tendencies. Avoidants are instinctively wary of emotional intensity. They have an innate need to protect their autonomy, and any hint of dependency or excessive closeness can trigger withdrawal. When you operate from a place of independence, when your emotional state is not contingent on someone else's actions or approval, you create a presence that cannot be easily manipulated. This does not require dramatic gestures or overt power plays. It is subtle, almost invisible, but deeply effective. The quiet assertion of self-possession communicates strength without the need for verbal persuasion, and this is precisely what commands respect from someone who is emotionally avoidant. Being different in this context means refusing to over-explain your intentions, reactions, or feelings. It means resisting the urge to seek constant reassurance or valid
Asian. Most people, when confronted with emotional uncertainty, attempt to alleviate it by increasing their visibility or verbal output, often drowning themselves in explanations and justifications. This approach, though seemingly earnest, signals dependence and can actually weaken one's position. In contrast, a person who is content to let actions speak, who does not feel compelled to justify every choice, demonstrates a form of psychological autonomy that is difficult for others to ignore. It quietly asserts, "I am not defined by your approval, and I am not controlled by your judgments. Judgment and labels are not a reflection of your shortcomings. They are a reflection of the observer's discomfort." People tend to project their insecurities onto those who challenge their expectations. When someone perceives that your behavior or attitude does not conform to the social script, they instinctively attempt to rationalize it through negative categorization. Calling someone cold or detached is not an analysis of their character. It is a coping mechanism designed to preserve the observer's sense of predictability and control. Recognizing this dynamic allows you to maintain your composure even when confronted with criticism or misinterpretation. It is the refusal to internalize others' labels that strengthens the advantage of being different. The key lies in the disciplined cultivation of calm and detachment. Emotional restraint is not repression. It is deliberate self-governance. It is deliberate self-governance. By managing your internal state and refusing to overreact to external pressures, you demonstrate a stability that is rare and attractive. Avoidants, who are naturally sensitive to pressure, instinctively respect this quality. When confronted with someone who is unaffected by their withdrawal, someone who maintains their own rhythm and emotional poise, they experience an unspoken recognition of strength. This recognition may not manifest immediately as overt admiration, but it plants the seed of engagement, curiosity, and, over time, respect. Another aspect of the dangerous advantage of being different is the ability to control one's exposure. The choice to withhold certain emotions or thoughts is not about manipulation. It is about preserving integrity and maintaining boundaries. By not revealing every inner nuance or reacting instantly to every stimulus, you create a psychological space that others cannot easily navigate. Scarcity of presence and controlled unpredictability compel attention. This is particularly effective with avoidant personalities because it interrupts the familiar patterns they encounter in typical relationships. People who chase approval or try to satisfy every expectation create a sense of urgency that triggers avoidance. But by remaining measured and self-contained, you reverse the dynamic. You introduce a form of intrigue that draws interest without the need for coercion. Ultimately, the danger in being different is inseparable from its power. It unsettles, it challenges, and it shifts perceptions. But this danger is advantageous precisely because it makes you ungovernable. You are not swayed by immediate judgments or external pressures. You operate from a consistent internal framework that cannot be dismantled by criticism or misunderstanding. This independence, when exercised consistently, creates a magnetic effect. People are naturally drawn to stability, mystery, and calm confidence, and being different allows you to embody all three simultaneously. The labels, the judgments, and the discomfort you generate are merely byproducts of the influence you exert, signaling that your presence matters in ways that ordinary conformity never could. Scarcity is one of the most underrated tools of influence, and it is closely tied to the power of being different. When you are constantly available, constantly agreeing, constantly explaining yourself, you train others to take your presence for granted. Your attention becomes ordinary because it is unlimited, and ordinary things are easily replaced. The human mind values what it cannot always predict or obtain effortlessly. Rarity creates tension, interest, and a subtle urgency that familiarity cannot replicate. Being different, in this sense, is not about being difficult for the sake of it. It is about preserving your time, your energy, and your emotional boundaries so that your presence carries meaning and weight. Most people fail to recognize that scarcity is a natural form of respect. When someone is everywhere, doing everything for everyone, they dilute their own significance. Their effort becomes invisible because it is expected. In contrast, when you are selective about where, when, and how you engage, your presence is noticed, valued, and remembered. This principle B comes especially powerful in the context of relationships with avoidant personalities. Avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional pressure, and they tend to pull away when they sense dependency or intensity. The more someone leans in, the more they trigger retreat. They are wired to protect their autonomy, and constant availability can overwhelm them, causing disengagement. When you cultivate scarcity, you are not manipulating, you are asserting independence. You prioritize your own growth, your routines, and your objectives without making others the center of your emotional universe. You do not respond immediately to every message or demand. You do not rearrange your schedule to chase validation or proximity. You exist in a rhythm that is governed by your own standards, not by the fluctuations of someone else's attention. This detachment is not coldness. It is strategic autonomy. And autonomy, when exercised consistently, becomes magnetic. Avoidance instinctively notice scarcity because it interrupts the patterns they expect. In most relationships, they encounter people who follow them closely, respond to every withdrawal, and overcompensate for distance with urgency. These patterns are familiar and predictable, which makes them safe. But when someone maintains composure and disappears into their own world without chasing, it challenges the avoidance assumptions. Suddenly, they cannot control the emotional landscape. They cannot predict your reactions. And unpredictability paired with self-contained stability creates intrigue. The scarcity of your attention makes you valuable not because you are unattainable in principle, but because you are not constantly surrendering yourself to meet their needs. The effect of scarcity is amplified by the perception of choice. When people sense that your time, energy, and attention are limited, they assign higher value to what they do receive. This is why being constantly available can be counterproductive. It removes tension, and without tension, desire diminishes. Difference in this context is an act of psychological leverage. By being selective, you cultivate an environment where your presence is desired rather than assumed. This does not require gamesmanship or manipulation. It requires consistency, self-awareness, and a commitment to your own priorities. Scarcity also fosters self-respect. When you enforce boundaries, you communicate to yourself and others that your energy is not disposable. You teach yourself that your time and attention are worthy of protection. This internal respect manifests externally. People, including avoidants, sense when someone values themselves. It is expressed not through words, but through the patterns of behavior, measured responses, thoughtful engagement, and a refusal to bend impulsively to emotional pressure. This form of self-containment conveys authority in subtle ways, establishing an invisible influence that is stronger than any verbal assertion. Importantly, scarcity does not equate to coldness or detachment in every interaction. It is not about withholding care entirely. It is about calibrating how, when, and to what extent you give. You can be present, supportive, and engaged without surrendering the core of your independence. By being mindful about the energy you expend, you create a rhythm of availability that others can predict without dominating your internal state. This balance is crucial. Too little presence, and you are perceived as distant. Too much, and you are consumed. Being different is the ability to navigate this tension intentionally. The danger and advantage of scarcity combined with difference lie in the way it shifts relational dynamics. Instead of reacting to the avoidance withdrawal or testing, you establish a framework. rocking, in which your value is self-contained. They must approach you, notice you, and adapt to your boundaries, reversing the typical power flow. The more you maintain your rhythm and independence, the more your scarcity generates attention, curiosity, and ultimately respect. Over time, the pattern solidifies. People respond to you not because you demand it, but because your presence matters precisely due to its selectivity. Ultimately, scarcity magnifies the effect of being different because it transforms ordinary interactions into meaningful encounters. Every message, every moment, every engagement carries significance because it is consciously offered rather than automatically given. This strategic preservation of attention is a quiet but potent form of influence. It is the principle that allows a person to stand apart without arrogance, to hold autonomy without isolation, and to command engagement without ever demanding it. The rare self-contained individual is not just different, they are inherently magnetic. One of the most difficult truths to embrace about being different is that it often requires the willingness to disappoint others. Most people spend their lives avoiding disapproval, seeking validation, and molding themselves to fit expectations. This pattern may bring temporary comfort, but it comes at a cost. You lose the subtle influence that emerges from self-possession. Choosing to maintain boundaries and honor your own needs, even when it causes friction, is one of the most powerful forms of leverage. Disappointment is not about cruelty or indifference. It is the natural consequence of refusing to dilute yourself for the sake of comfort. It signals that your internal framework, your values, and your priorities are non-negotiable. This principle is particularly effective when interacting with avoidant personalities. Avoidants are sensitive to pressure and demand, and their instinctive reaction is often to retreat when confronted with intensity. They pull back when they sense overinvestment or dependence, not out of malice but as a protective mechanism. Most people, when faced with withdrawal, panic. They rush to reassure, explain, or placate. They try to fill the emotional void immediately, often intensifying the very pressure that caused the withdrawal. The person who stands apart, however, does something radically different. They allow space. They do not chase. They do not overreact. They honor the distance without abandoning their own standards. This ability to remain steady while others test boundaries is a form of quiet power. Being willing to disappoint means that you do not over-explain your choices. It means that your actions are guided by clarity rather than appeasement. When someone tests you by withdrawing or challenging your autonomy, your response or lack of reaction communicates more than words ever could. Silence, composure, and measured engagement create an emotional tension that others cannot easily decode. It forces them to confront their own assumptions and expectations. This is uncomfortable for many, but discomfort is the currency of influence. People are drawn to what challenges them, particularly when that challenge is delivered without aggression or drama. Boundaries are central to this approach. Most individuals are taught that being agreeable is the path to acceptance. They blur limits, overextend themselves, and compromise their values to avoid friction. But boundaries, when exercised consistently, generate respect. They demonstrate that you value yourself more than approval. They communicate that your attention is not disposable and your energy is worth protecting. With avoidance, this is particularly impactful because they have a subconscious radar for emotional neediness. They respect, often without admitting it, those who are self-contained and do not collapse into their withdrawal. By maintaining your boundaries, you create a subtle authority that is difficult to challenge or manipulate. Willingness to disappoint also requires a disciplined emotional detachment. It is not about being cold or indifferent. It is about refusing to make your sense of security contingent on someone else's responses. Most people experience anxiety when they sense that they have upset or displeased someone they care about. That anxiety drives reactive behavior, explanations, concessions, overcompensation. Being different means managing that anxiety internally. You understand that disapproval is not an attack on your worth. It is simply a reaction to your autonomy. By maintaining composure, you reinforce your own emotional independence, which paradoxically attracts attention and curiosity from others. Another aspect of this principle is the deliberate use of patience. The person who is willing to disappoint does not rush resolution or closure. They do not attempt to force emotional alignment prematurely. Instead, they allow situations to unfold according to their own pace, giving others the opportunity to adjust without coercion. Avoidance often tests emotional endurance by creating distance. Reacting impulsively or trying to force connection undermines your leverage. Waiting, holding steady, and demonstrating consistency signals a reliability rooted in independence, not dependency. Being different in this way also cultivates intrigue. People are naturally drawn to those who do not bend at the slightest pressure. When your behavior is guided by principles rather than the fear of disapproval, your presence becomes both stable and unpredictable. Avoidants who are attuned to patterns notice this difference. They may initially resist or test the boundaries, but over time, they begin to recognize that your independence is not a threat, but a measure of strength. Disappointment then becomes a tool not for control, but for establishing respect. Ultimately, the willingness to disappoint transforms relationships from transactional exchanges into dynamics of psychological depth. You are no longer reacting to others' emotional fluctuations. You are creating a space in which your autonomy is respected, your boundaries are recognized, and your presence holds genuine weight. The discomfort your difference generates is not an accident. It is the natural byproduct of standing apart without apology. Those who understand this subtle influence realize that true power often lies not in compliance or constant availability, but in the calm, measured refusal to dilute oneself for the comfort of others. By mastering this, you turn the act of being different into a quiet but formidable advantage that cannot be easily ignored, manipulated, or dismissed. The ultimate advantage of being different lies in cultivating psychological independence, a state where your sense of self is anchored internally rather than dependent on the approval, attention, or actions of others. Most people live in a constant cycle of adaptation, adjusting their behavior, opinions, and emotions to fit into expected patterns. This approach may bring temporary acceptance, but it comes at a hidden cost. It makes you predictable, controllable, and ultimately ordinary. True influence emerges not from pleasing others, but from standing apart while remaining fully grounded in your own principles. The person who achieves this level of independence is not easily swayed, not easily intimidated, and not easily understood. And it is precisely this combination that creates a quiet form of power. Psychological independence is the refusal to make your emotional state contingent upon external, circumstances. It is the recognition that distance, silence, or even temporary rejection from others does not diminish your value or control. In relationships, especially with avoidant personalities, this quality becomes a critical leverage point. Avoidants are wired to retreat when they sense dependency, intensity, or pressure. They instinctively pull back when confronted with someone whose emotional availability feels contingent on them. Most people respond to withdrawal with anxiety, explanations, or attempts at reassurance, unintentionally increasing the very pressure that caused the retreat. The person who is psychologically independent, however, does something radically different. They maintain their center, continue to live according to their own priorities, and do not react impulsively to withdrawal. This calm, unshakable presence generates intrigue and fosters respect. Being psychologically independent is not the same as being cold or detached. It is about carrying yourself with steady confidence even when uncertainty exists. You can be engaged, caring, and attentive without making yourself vulnerable to manipulation or emotional depletion. This requires a high degree of self-awareness and discipline. You recognize your own patterns, your triggers, and your values, and you act from that awareness rather than in reaction to the whims of others. Every decision, every action, every interaction is measured against an internal standard rather than external validation. This internal authority creates a magnetic quality because it signals reliability, self-sufficiency, and composure, qualities that are rare and compelling in a world where most people are driven by fear of loss or need for approval. Independence also transforms the way people perceive scarcity and value. When your attention and engagement are not automatic, they carry weight. Every interaction becomes meaningful because it is chosen deliberately rather than given indiscriminately. This is especially effective with avoidants who are sensitive to emotional pressure and often withdraw when they feel overwhelmed. When someone responds to their distance with calmness and continued self-possession, it reverses the usual power dynamic. The avoidant begins to experience curiosity, attention, and sometimes even admiration because they cannot predict or control your behavior. They are forced to meet you on your terms rather than the other way around, which is a subtle but profound shift in relational dynamics. Another critical aspect of psychological independence is the ability to tolerate uncertainty. Most people fear ambiguity in relationships, interpreting silence, distance, or hesitation as a reflection of their own inadequacy. They scramble to reduce discomfort through explanations, reassurance, or constant engagement. Being different in the sense of psychological independence means embracing uncertainty without panic. You recognize that temporary distance or withdrawal is not a personal attack, nor does it require immediate intervention. This tolerance creates a stable emotional field, which is both attractive and disarming to avoidant personalities. It signals emotional maturity and resilience, which are difficult qualities to manipulate or resist. Psychological independence also allows for selective engagement. You choose how, when, and to what extent you invest your attention and energy. This does not mean withholding care arbitrarily, but rather aligning your actions with your priorities and values. By doing so, you communicate that your time and energy are valuable and not disposable. This subtle assertion of self-worth enhances your influence without requiring confrontation or coercion. People, including avoidants, respond to this stability instinctively. They sense that your presence is grounded in choice rather than need, which creates both tension and attraction. Ultimately, the power of being different and psychologically independent is that it makes you ungovernable. You are not reactive to emotional fluctuations, nor are you dependent on approval for your sense of security. You operate from a steady internal compass that allows you to remain composed even in situations that would provoke anxiety or overreaction in most people. This unshakable core makes you rare, magnetic, and influential without drama or overt effort. It is the culmination of all the advantages of difference: composure, scarcity, boundaries, patience, and self-possession. By mastering psychological independence, you transform the act of being different into a living strategy. You do not seek to dominate or control others. You simply refuse to be controlled yourself. Your value, influence, and presence emerge naturally from the integrity of your self-containment. In a world where emotional turbulence is the norm, the person who is firmly anchored in their own stability commands attention, respect, and fascination. This is the ultimate and most dangerous advantage of being different. The quiet, unassailable power that comes from being fully yourself, regardless of the expectations, judgments, or attempts at control from others.